So, Courtney, thank you for coming today.
Yeah, thanks
what
for
I'm
having
hoping
me.
to do is just learn, your journey, what's got you here, and starting from the basis that I really don't know much about you. You don't know anything about me, or very little. How would you define yourself?
Well, I'm a designer by trade, but I also write for a couple of publications about feminist and queer issues. I did a project last year called Do Our Boobs Now, in which I took topless selfies throughout my transition and throughout hormone therapy with the breast development going on to see at what point was too much boob. And I used that as a way to talk about the increasing loss of privilege throughout gender transition, of being seen as more feminine and more as a woman, and the associated privilege loss with that.
How old are you?
I'm 26.
26.
Yeah.
And how long have you been aware of the fact that you would want to change genders or have gender identity issues?
Yeah, since as long as I can remember, basically. I was a very effeminate kid. And I guess I started like explicitly questioning my gender around 16. I mean, in terms of actually thinking about transition and stuff like that, I had a lot of frustration with gender roles up until then.
So you said something that was interesting. You were an effeminate kid. What does that mean?
I was just very theatrical, was very all over the place. I loved doing dance. I loved the way I talked was in a more feminine way, especially for...
So can I stop you, because you've
Yeah.
used some gender stereotypes, and I'm not in any way
Absolutely,
critical.
yeah.
I dance, I was theatrical, that is more feminine. I'm not sure that's what you meant. Maybe it was what you meant, I don't know.
Yeah, I think gender stereotypes play an actual role in society. I'm not saying that those things should not be challenged, or that those things are objective and necessarily there, but they are a thing that plays within our society. And growing up as a effeminate kid who read as male at the time, I experienced that a lot of people calling me sissy or bitch or faggot or any of these kind of things.
These are kids?
Yeah, this was from...
Same age kids?
Yeah, this was primarily, I think it started when I was about 7-ish, I think.
So from a very young age?
Yeah.
What did that do to your self-esteem?
Destroyed it. I had really no social group, I guess. I would have kind of fleeting friends, but they were always kind of short relationships. As I grew up in Alberta, I grew up in a place called Stettler.
Yeah.
Very, very small, very, very Catholic, very hockey-oriented for the boys. And as a result, being friends with me was kind of social suicide. And so I ended up being ostracized.
So I'm smiling, it's not funny obviously, but
Yeah.
the way you use the words is, being associated with me with social suicide is just a very engaging phrase. And sums up a lot. So your self-esteem was very low. How were things in your family, if you don't mind me asking? How was that for you?
Okay. I mean, I think it was hard on my parents seeing how hard I was bullied. And I've told them this now, they didn't know at the time, but I was suicidal from the age of about 8 to about 12.
Did you express it to anybody?
Possibly school counselors. I did see, wasn't doing much over lunchtime and things like that, so often I would be seeing school counselors, and the bullying I was experiencing was so heavy that it was something I needed to talk about very regularly. And often the response I got was basically teaching me how to be more masculine, about standing upright and putting shoulders back, and ways of stop being so limp-wristed and things like that.
So it's almost, and I'm just going from one thing to the other, but please excuse me, it's almost as though someone is blaming the rape victim for dressing provocatively. It's the kind of feeling I'm getting. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think there's, I think at the time, obviously I wasn't explicitly aware of my gender issues. I was aware that I presented in a way that wasn't typical for boys, but I didn't really think of myself as a girl yet.
But your counsellors weren't intervening with the bullies, weren't intervening with educating the group and saying, they were saying, why don't you change yourself to conform more and therefore reduce the bullying that way? That's what I think you're saying.
Yeah, it's almost like the reparative therapy that they do with gay folks, expecting them to pray the gay away and all that sort of stuff.
Okay, as long as you take the word therapy out of this, I'm fine with that.
I'm sorry, yeah.
So you've gone on a journey and you've been very open. As I say, I'm learning about you as we're talking, so I appreciate you being so open. But the journey you've gone on, has that increased your self-esteem?
Yeah, more. Definitely in... sorry, I'm stumbling over my words here. When I was about in my late teens, I realized that almost on my own accord came to this thing that, oh, when I do present in a more masculine way, I don't have the same social abuses that I had before. And so I kind of almost naturally took on this more masculine role in the fact that I got treated better, and therefore I wanted to keep doing those behaviors that kind of made me feel better. And so I took on this act up until I was 23-ish of being very masculine, taking on a lot of toxic masculinity roles.
Such as?
I did not treat girls in my life very well. I was very homophobic. I was very racist. Well, I don't know if I was actually those things. I was very, what's the word?
You expressed it. But you didn't feel it inside.
Yeah, I expressed it, and it was more of a shock value thing than an actual...
Did you find it more that you're accepted, the more you acted this role, so people would say, yeah, he, as it was then, he's one of the guys, and the more you acted in this way, the more you're accepted? I think that's what you're saying. Yeah,
I was definitely accepted, and I was definitely in a group that was more focused around those sort of masculine gender roles. And it was all an act, and it felt very uncomfortable. Social interactions for me were a set of rehearsed scripts, and kind of forced behaviors. And getting back to the question about self-esteem, in coming out as a woman and starting to kind of refigure out who I naturally am and kind of erasing these scripts, which is very difficult. I relied on them for so long. That's been a big boost, and being like, hey, I'm not a fake person anymore. Like, this is naturally who I want to be, and this is very, it feels good. But in other ways, it's been really difficult. The ways that I perceive my body are a lot different now, both in being trans and in being a woman. And you internalize it, and it becomes this thing where originally it's just an external pressure of people in society basing you off your looks and stuff like that.
So just to be clear, so I understand, you're talking about as a woman, people judge you primarily on your physical image, is a feeling that you get much more than you had when you were a man. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah. And or when I presented as a man, yeah.
And sorry, I apologize.
No
worries. And in terms of the way that impacts you, how do you experience that?
At first, it was a very externalized thing. It was like, people are doing this, this is kind of shitty. But over time, it's become internalized. It's become this, I've started valuing myself in that way.
When people pay compliments to you, or don't, but let's focus on the compliments. When people give you compliments about your physical appearance, how does that make you feel?
It makes me feel great. And I put a lot of value in that, probably too much value, in the sense that sometimes in order to feel good about my appearance and good about myself in general, posting a selfie is a really great way to do that.
What happens if you post a selfie and people say negative things about your image?
That's definitely a rarity. Something that does happen a lot is it's often cis women who will comment saying stuff like, almost in this weird patronizing, wanting to bring you into womanhood way, they'll be like, oh, if you just did this with your makeup, you'd look so much better. Or, are you planning on getting your jaw shaven and sculpted and stuff like that? Because it would really make you a lot prettier. Just
to change topic, because it interests me, so I apologize.
Yeah, no
I always find it interesting, which is relationships. And I don't necessarily mean romantic relationships, I mean relationships in general. How did you find those change as you changed?
Yeah, It was definitely interesting. I wasn't sure what I was to expect coming out. I was very nervous coming out and seeing how relationships would change, both with family, with friends. And I came out largely in a Facebook post. I made a video kind of explaining everything, just because that way I could almost get ahead of the gossip, as opposed to coming out to some people and then they have to...
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah. And so...
So it was very sudden and very broad.
Very broad. And I kind of retreated. I was kind of hermiting for about 8 months or so prior to that. So this was kind of the first time people had heard from me in a while. And yeah, as I started transitioning more, originally things didn't change all too much. Some people were a little weirded out, but largely people were supportive, which was a little surprising to me.
So you said earlier on that you regretted the way you treated some women.
Absolutely.
How did you deal with that after you transitioned? Did you go back and say, I'm sorry, or?
I've been lucky enough to have conversations with some of the women in my life and being like, hey, I was a piece of shit. And I apologize, and I realized that apologizing isn't enough. But I recognized that what I was doing was shitty. However, I haven't had the opportunity to apologize to everyone, and I think there's probably people or women out there who see me doing activism work now and see me as a more visible person and find it a bit disingenuous considering who I was before.
Two other extraordinary things about this interview were firstly how she managed to treat her body as an object by taking pictures of it, but not objectifying it. And secondly, how she learned the insight she gained from literally walking in someone else's shoes. Thank you for joining me on Shrink Wrapped.